Excellent. As I mentioned this morning, the Victoria and Albert Museum sits in London in the heart of South Kensington. Between ourselves, the Natural History Museum and the Science Museum, we attract more visitors to London than visit Venice each year. We have about 2.9 million objects and about 7 miles of museum space. And we're planning on becoming a very international organisation, currently building a museum in China, Dundee, and 2 others. One will be the largest museum in the UK for over 100 years. I'm here today to talk about the cast courts at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Take up a very small part of the museum. It's a fairly small part of the collection, but it's a collection that was built up by our founding director, Henry Cole, built upon a convention signed in 1867. They're casts and copies of European monuments and sculptures, and they were built up for the purpose of education, to give access to people who didn't then have the money and funds to be able to experience the great monuments of the day. They were not actually put in place as a preservation and protection method, but they were there to share the vision and to educate. And they include, as well as casts, they also include electrotypes and other forms of copies. It's particularly strange that I'm standing here talking about the value of copies when I spent 10 years of my life arresting people for fakes and forgeries, for using copies in a different way, and now I'm suggesting that they are the way forward. But I genuinely believe they are, and of course there's a big difference, and another lecture on the difference between a copy and a fake. So on the right you can see the cast courts as they sit at the V&A at the moment. There's 2 courts, the one on the right here, the Italian court, and then on the left, it is not the Italian court, even though it's got Trajan's column in it, is the old picture from when they were originally formed. So, Martin Rort, the director, will speak tomorrow at the Information and Data workshop a little bit more about this, but we are entering into a collaboration with the Venice Architectural Biennale, and we'll run the first partnered or shared exhibition space that event has held, and it will be entitled The World of Fragile Parts, and it's looking at copying as preservation, and it opens up a number of profound critical questions concerning the authenticity and value and how we choose what to copy, the quality of information included in that copy, and the purposes to which we apply copies. The exhibition is running from, like I say, May to November, and it's designed to be a temporary laboratory for the study of copying and preservation. The curator for this, V&A curator called Brendan Cumier, has developed the display and will welcome feedback during the course of that event. He will effectively be looking at the first part, the copying of the preservation, the reasons why, and what should be done. Like I say, Martin will speak a lot more about this tomorrow. In that display, it highlights there are 4 main reasons why we should revisit the power and the value of copies. Of course, destruction from violence, destruction from natural disasters, destruction from tourism, and urbanisation as well. So this is the original, I'm not going to read this, but this is the entire 1867 convention. It's a very simple worded document. It was drawn up by Henry Cole, started in 1861, I believe, with the assistance of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the United Kingdom. And it was signed and ratified over the course of 7 years by 15 Crown Heads of State. And it basically says we've all got lovely things and we should share them and we should make them accessible to everybody. It doesn't say much more than that. But that's it. It takes up on the right-hand slide there, you can actually see the original convention. The first page and a half of it is the convention, and the second page and a half of it is the signatures of the 15 Crown Heads of State. So, when looking at the value of copy, I've put 3 pictures up here. William von Bode, on the left-hand side, the later director of the Berlin Museums, suggested that just a small fragment of an original was of far greater value than the cast of a complete masterpiece. And this attitude throughout the 1920s definitely gained pace with curators who believed that casts and copies had no real value within a museum. However, in the middle picture there, David was presented to the Victoria and Albert Museum as a token of diplomacy, soft diplomacy maybe, by the Grand Duke of Tuscany to Queen Victoria after he refused to lend an object to the National Gallery in London. He unprompted sent that entire cast of David over to London as a form of compensation. And of course I asked the question here as well with Greek and Roman copies, why do we value Roman copies of Greek sculpture any more than maybe we can't value more modern copies of other objects? So looking at the value of copy, the Victoria and Albert Museum has in the past shared space. The architectural courts had both copies and originals within them because they were there for the same purpose, to train, educate and inspire architects, designers and students of the day. And on the bottom left-hand side there you can see the screen there which now sits in the Medieval Renaissance galleries, but at the time it was in with the casts in the architectural courts at the V&A. So then there's some reasons why casts have become important to us. The second largest collection in the world, I believe, of casts was held at the Crystal Palace display. The Victoria and Albert Museum and a number of others, including the British Museum, have tried for many years to get the copies to form a national collection of casts, but were unable to do so. And unfortunately, hundreds and hundreds of these casts were destroyed during the fire, and those that remained started to join the Victoria and Albert's collection. There are also items such as this, Christ washing the feet of his disciples, from Lübeck Cathedral in Germany, which is the only surviving copy. The original was bombarded and destroyed during the war, and so the only record of that object exists in cast form at the Victoria and Albert Museum. There's also the value of casting something in 1860 and its deterioration today. This is an element from Trajan's column in Rome, of course, the right-hand side showing the damage now from pollution and erosion, and the left-hand side, the copy, the cast as it was in 1867, in a really far better condition than it is today. So the idea at the moment is for the Victoria and Albert Museum to enter into a first stage to rewrite a convention, to rewrite the 1867 convention, conveniently 150 years after the original. It will be very much the first stage in a three-stage operation, but we want it to be international. We want it not just to be a European exchange, it needs to be an international exchange, taking advantage of our position as an international museum to encourage people from around the world to share their objects and to give access to those objects here as well. The idea is to open up the collections to a wider audience, preserve objects for future generations, and to record change as well. We quite like the idea of the timeline that exists on Google Earth, where you can go back and look at a different area and different times throughout history. And with 3D scanning, as we've just seen from SciArc, the idea that you might be able one day to walk into an exhibit and to see how a building or a monument has changed throughout history, we think would be a fantastic experience. So how would this work? Well, the first convention was very much about a shop window, just providing objects that could then be seen by other people. So you would tell the world that you had these objects, and it then involved one-to-one negotiation to get a cast of that copy and to send it to the museum for display. What we're hoping to do is to create a virtual sharing where by uploading the data that you have on your objects by consent, you also agree at the same time to the use of those objects by other partners for certain things. So removing all of those obstacles that could be put in the way and allowing objects to transfer and to provide opportunities for people to see them all over the world. Last slide. Very bad form of me to be over time. This is how maybe the cast court should be seen in the future, not as a space, as is depicted there on the left-hand side within a museum, but actually just as an event, something that you could walk into. And these gold boxes have particularly struck me by Amar Bakshi. There's one here at Yale at the moment where you walk in and meet someone from a different part of the world. It would be wonderful maybe to be able to walk in and experience objects from around the world as a visitor to an area. And this very final one is just a glimpse into the future. We're working with Essex University with Dr. Tim Toomke We're looking at touch technology, so not only will you see a 3D scan, but you'll actually be able to touch it through gloves. And he's developing a technology which will hopefully be refined enough to allow a visitor or a student to feel even the wood grain on an object within that piece. That's my turn. Thank you.